Welcome, everyone. All right, we rolling? All right, fabulous. It's good to see everyone here. It is Thursday, May 9th, 2024. And we are here for a discussion of the FY25 Athens-Clarke County Unified Government Budget. And so just in terms of order of event, we'll have our first Taxpayer Bill of Rights hearing first. Following the Taxpayer Bill of Rights hearing, we'll have the budget overview from Manager Williams, components of which people have already heard about, but we want to go ahead and think about it comprehensively. And then I'll turn it over to Mayor Pro Tem Thornton, who will lead the commission in the discussion of the budget, including any adjustments or modifications that they seek. But to begin the Taxpayer Bill of Rights hearing, I think I've got the timer on the table. And so Shariki is going to go ahead and keep track of this. So we have a 2-minute opportunity for anybody who'd like to speak to the budget beginning right now. So if you want to line up at the podium and just make sure you let us know your name and place of residence, and then you have time to speak.
Roll call.
Yes, sir. Oh, yeah, we'll do a roll call. Roll call.
Davenport,
Here.
Link, Taylor, Wright.
Yeah.
Fisher.
Here. Here.
Culpepper,
Here.
Myers. Here. Thornton. Here. Hamby.
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right, we have a quorum. All right. Anybody who'd like to speak to us, now is that time.
Before I start 2 minutes, just remind you that this was not advertised on your website as a budget hearing. It was advertised as a commissioned budget review. My name is Michael McClendon. I live in Princeton Mill. Good evening. The mayor's budget gives the saying, "Spending like a drunken sailor," new meaning. I'll speak to the urgent need to rein in spending and roll back taxes later. But tonight, I just want to call your attention to the fact that I believe you're violating the Georgia Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Local governments must now hold 3 hearings to set their millage rate higher than the rollback rate. You have set 3 public hearings, even though tonight on the website, it advertised as a budget review, not as a budget hearing. However, I believe you're in violation of the state statute. These hearings are intended to provide public input into the proposed tax increase associated with the budget. It does not take a genius to know that the purpose of these hearings is to facilitate an exchange of ideas and information between the public and the commission to better inform your decisions about tax increases in the budget. When Athens-Clarke County deliberately schedules the 3rd budget hearing the same night it plans to vote on the rate increase in budget, you're telling citizens that you don't really care what they say. Your schedule demonstrates an arrogance and disrespectful attitude towards taxpayers and certainly does not reflect the spirit and intent of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. On behalf of taxpayers, I ask you to comply with the spirit and intent of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights by resetting your schedule so your vote is days after the last public hearing to facilitate consideration of taxpayer input and to answer questions, which is really the intent of tabling. After all, you have until the end of June to pass the budget, and the fact that you want to go on vacation in June is not a valid reason to deprive taxpayers of their rights. The way you're going about these hearings just affirms what people think about transparency in Athens-Clarke County government.
Thank you, Mr. McClendon. I appreciate it. Anyone else who'd like to speak this evening? Hearing none, thank you everyone for coming out tonight. I'm going to go ahead and ask Manager Williams to go ahead and begin the overview of the budget so commissioners and public have an understanding of the components in the proposed FY25 budget.
Thank you, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, Commissioners, staff, residents. What I'd like to do.
Let me excuse myself for 1 minute. One of my constituents who is not a Mr. Talbert, he called, he's not an elderly guy. He is very concerned about his taxes, and I just want to put it on the record that I'm speaking for him as his commissioner, that he's concerned about taxes. I don't want to get more details. I know we're going to be going through that process, but I do not want to overlook him because he's not here. Thank you.
So several sections. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to ask our finance director, David Boyd, to share a little bit about trends in revenues, expenditures, fund, use of fund balance, that type of thing. Then I'm going to go over the mayor's recommended budget. Then I have some answers to some questions that y'all have provided as well. So there's several sections of this. We're going to start with David Boyd, and then we'll go. I'll cover the mayor's budget.
Well, good evening. The purpose of this review tonight, this finance review is basically just to notify you trends we're beginning to see in the general fund itself, as far as potential trends are concerned. I do want to start out by saying that the general fund overall through March is within budget in both revenues and expenditures. So this isn't a meeting to say that there's something out of whack, but there is a change in trends from previous years. Just to give you a recap, recent fiscal years have displayed a high revenue growth. Now that's due to several factors. We've had property appreciation and property construction. We've had sales tax revenue growth, and that's for a variety of reasons, beginning about 2019 when the Supreme Court allowed taxation of internet sales, and then later on taxation of short-term rentals. And then even recently, I think it was in the 23 General Assembly, they decided to add the tax to downloaded products. Like if you order a book online from Apple and it costs $14.99, now it's $16.19 because they add tax onto that. So there's all these different things they keep adding the sales tax onto that have caused that growth, as well as a return of people to Athens for activities during various times of the year. And because property values have grown, and when I say property, I mean all property in the county, have grown significantly in the last few years, that has led to other taxes that are related to that, such as the insurance premium tax, where you pay for insurance on your property. Well, the way the state sets it, it's based on the value. So as the value rises and you insure more and the premium goes up, the tax goes up. So we've had really good few years in terms of revenue growth. It was unexpected, and you wouldn't have thought that would have occurred during the time period that we've been through. On the flip side of that, because of the pandemic and some of the leftover effects from that, our expenditures have been well below budget for the past several years. So, a lot of it has to do in the beginning with remote work. It has to do with cancellation of programs. We had an upturn in turnover and position vacancies. I think y'all had a review recently with the HR department, and on one of those pages, they showed you the turnover rate, and it spiked up until about the first big pay raise that was given in fiscal year 23. Then it kind of leveled off. Then the one you gave for fiscal year 24, it's been going back down. So it's gone down from a high of about 20 to about 12% on average. So, but with that came cost. In general, with position vacancy, remote work, cancellation of programs and all of that, our operating costs just came in well under budget. So that's where we were. Where are we going forward? Well, let's start with this current fiscal year, last year. The state legislature passed a $25,000 homestead exemption for Clarke County. It applies only to Athens-Clarke County, not the school board or anybody else. That cost us around $3 million in revenue. House Bill 581 passed, signed by the governor. That's the floating homestead exemption. And that limits the increase, market increase that can be applied to homesteaded properties. If it passes, it has to go to referendum in November and be passed, but I don't know of too many homeowners that are going to vote for that. But then the state revenue commissioner will set the limit on whatever property can go up under reassessment using the CPI or some other method he deems or she deems necessary. They also have allowed local governments to adopt a new sales tax called a FLOST, flexible local option, which can only be used for millage rate rollback. So like our local option sales tax rolls back the millage rate, you could add up to another 1% to do the same thing. So it'd be 2 cents rolling back the millage rate. Expenditures. We've seen turnover and vacant positions down, combined wage increases and other budget enhancements or benefit enhancements. And now full-time wages for the first time in several years are actually running the budget. So it's been a long time that we've seen that happen. Operating expenses reflect more of a normal operating range. So one of the things I noticed over the last few years is that as our revenues grew, our expenditures did not grow quite as rapidly, and that opened up that operating margin. So that operating margin expanded, and that's why we had several years of good surpluses. And also in the past few years, we've had inflation, so that's also added to our expenditures. And so now we're beginning to see a change. In addition, I should say, the trend has been over the past few years to increase our transfers from the general fund to other funds. Sometimes it's for one-time items, like you might do a one-time transfer to the transit fund to, increase its balance sheet position. This year we had two amendments to the budget where we used fund balance one time to buy property and to buy fire equipment and so forth. And so all of those are beginning to narrow that margin that we've enjoyed for the past several years. I just wanted you to be aware of that during the budget process. And so this three little charts that I've given you, the first chart kind of shows you what I'm talking about, where, in fiscal year 22 through March, this is all through March, not full year, we had 127 million in revenue and 84 million in expenditures. Following year, 23 through March, we had $142 million in revenue, which was an 11.7% growth. Expenditures went up to 92 million, which was a 9.6% growth. So you could see revenues were still growing faster than expenditures. Fast forward to today, fiscal year 24, revenues have gone up even more, 13% to 161 million basically. But because we're returning to normal operating conditions, our expenditures have jumped to 122 million and went up 31.8% year over year. So what that really all boils down to is, if you look on the following page, this is just it's a simple bar chart. So the blue represents what we call the change in net fund balance. Think of it as profit, loss, surplus, deficit, however you want. The way the general fund works is we don't, we're not like a corporation that sort of has, equal revenue distribution throughout the year. We earn most of our revenue in the first 6 months. Okay. So by the first 6 or 7 months of the year, we've brought in most of our revenue. In fact, through March, we brought in 95% of our revenue. But expenditures continue on. So this net change in fund balance will shrink throughout the rest of this year. So for April, May, and June, this is going to go down. And when you get to the end of the year, you either have a surplus or deficit based on this change in fund balance. So if you look at fiscal year 22, in March, we had a net change in fund balance of 40 million, and we ended the year with a $13 million surplus. Look at fiscal year 23, we had a $43.8 million change in fund balance through March, and we ended with an $11 million surplus. This year, we have a $26 million net change in fund balance. And so our best guesstimate at this point in time is that we will have a deficit or use of fund balance, depending on how you want to call it, of about $5 to $10 million. So it will be the first deficit that we've had in probably 6 or 7 years. You just need to be aware of that. Now, what's on the next page, because there's been questions asked about fund balance, unassigned fund balance. So if you look at the top part, I know this is a little busy, but if you look at the top part of this, this is the actual. So if you look at fiscal year 20, you'll see that we had a unreserved fund balance as a percentage of expenditures and transfers out of 25%. And so what that meant was, because we have a policy of 2 months reserve. So our 2 months reserve was 21 million, and our excess over reserve policy was about 11 million. So that meant we had about a month or so more reserves than what our policy called for. And you can look throughout this whole period here, and you will see that beginning in 22 and 23, that began to expand. And so in 22 and 23, we had about a 32% unreserved or unsigned reserve balance, which meant that we had almost 4 months of reserve on hand. And so in 22 and 23, we had 21.2 and 24.6 million in excess reserves above our minimum. Look at 24, we're expecting about a $10 million deficit, up to a $10 million deficit. And so that's going to drop us down, all things being equal, to roughly a 26% unreserved fund balance. That's still above the 2 months. So it's about 3 months at this point in time. But the excess over reserves required is going to drop from 24.6 to about 17.7. Then looking at the recommended budget with a built-in deficit or use of fund balance, I should say. By the time we end fiscal year 25, based on whatever the information we have now, that's going to drop down to about a 23%, which is still above our minimum. So it's not that there's anything in peril right now. We just want you to realize that the trend is not going up like it was. It's beginning to normalize, and it's going down to that normalized point. So you'll see on the fiscal year 25 column in red, the budget that was presented to you, the mayor, contains a use of fund balance of $5 million. That's a deficit. That means that revenues have exceeded, expenditures have exceeded revenues by $5 million. So I just wanted to point this out to you that whatever decisions you make, it's all your choice. But if that increases, then that unreserved fund balance reserve at the bottom there will go down at some point. That's a possibility, unless we get a shock and we get like some major increase in revenue that we don't foresee. We're just using what's on the budget. So I know there's been questions about where are we in terms of fund balance. Just wanted everyone to be aware that we're still doing well. We're okay. We were up there in almost AAA bond category for a long time, but now everything's beginning to normalize and we're getting back to normal budgeting where, we're filling up our positions. We've given pay raises and stuff that have helped fill those positions. And so going forward, things are going to be a little tighter than they were in the past. So any questions about all of this?
I think So about the referendum in November. So I'm a taxpayer and my property taxes jumped up 20%. So are you saying that if this vote passed, that would be frozen at a certain amount locally or?
It's a statewide constitutional amendment.
So, but how would our property taxes though be looked at?
Okay, so for everyone that owns a home at the end of 24, that's homestead, okay? The way I've read the rule, and I'm not a lawyer, but the way I've read the rule is that the base year for determining your appraised value going forward will be your 24 valuation. So if your home's appraised at $300,000 going forward, that's where you start. And then the state revenue commissioner will decide what the appropriate inflation rate is. She can use the CPI, put out by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I don't think the law specifies they have to use that, but that's one method they can use. And so if, let's say, inflation dropped to 2.5% for the year, and that is the method of determining inflation that the revenue commissioner chose, then your market appraisal would be capped at 2.5%. So, and this isn't like the $25,000 homestead. This isn't an immediate $3 million impact like that increase in the homestead exemption was. This is something that's going to be gradual. Then, of course, depends on the turnover of homestead properties, because every time the home turns over to someone new, then it gets reset to a higher value. So.
So is the new floss, is that for the school district and, local governments, or is it just local government?
It's just local governments, to my knowledge. So you get to choose. Again, this is based on my reading of what ACCG put out on the rule itself. You get to choose whether you want to increase, add a new sales tax, and you can do it in 0.05 increments up to 1%. So you can have a 0.5% all the way up to 1%. But all of that sales tax would be treated just like the local option sales tax and would roll back the millage rate for all properties within the county.
It's $1 for $1.
Well, it's just whatever the sales tax brings in.
Right.
The tax commissioner just converts that to, appropriate millage rate and reduces. It doesn't affect our revenue stream.
No, it doesn't. So
It just reduces the millage.
So we're getting $21 million in sales tax. That's approximately three mills. Is that how that would work?
Well, we're getting about 35 or 37.
Well, I know that, but I'm using that number.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah.
If right now,
Yeah, I'd have to look at the actual.
1 mil is 7 million.
Yeah, I'd have to look at the actual form that the
If you bring
tax commissioner,
21 million in sales tax and you reduce the budget by 100 mills.
something. I'm not going to commit to that 100%, but
I mean, just as an example.
yeah. Yeah.
Carol?
Yeah, on the FLOST, a lot of people don't realize that the FLOST is also applied to the sale of food. I think the first penny isn't, but the FLOST is. So I'm pulling it up here. I've gone through this before. Do you happen to know if the FLOST applies to food?
All local sales taxes. So local option sales tax, the special purpose, the transportation special purpose, and the ELOST for the school system all apply to food. It's only the 4 cents of state sales tax that does not apply to certain categories of food.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you, Dave. I appreciate that. And I asked David and finance staff to pull that analysis together because there are changes that are going on. There's trends, and it's additional context to use you deliberate approving this budget adding to it, cutting, however you proceed. That's some of the context to it. What I'd like to do, know that you have just received these, and for the benefit of both the public and you, is just call out some of the pertinent information, particularly in section B, which is basically a summary of the budget. And both for elected officials and residents, that's where I think, don't get too overwhelmed with the whole book. If you go to section B of this particular, within 20 or so pages, you'll get a good sense of what's going on. So I'd like to highlight that for you now. And I'm starting on page B1. And this is the mayor's budget. And just for the sake of process so that everybody understands, I believe it's captured in the charter that manager compiles a draft budget based on requests from department directors. And I meet with those departments and hear them and put that together. And then a team of the mayor pro tem, and myself meet with each of the elected and constitutional officers to hear their initial request. And then they are also given an opportunity to come before this body and share their insights with the full commission. And then I turn my draft budget over to the mayor after alerting the commission through the Big Rocks presentation about just the general contours of that. And just for the sake of everyone's understanding, this goes back to late December, early January. We actually give a projection of where we're headed and some of the bigger issues that we're going to hit. Then the mayor has approximately 30 days or so to make any changes that, in this case, Mayor Gertz saw fit, and then he passes that along, which has happened. And that brings us here. In the month of May, we usually have several budget workshops, and this is the first one. So going through this mayor's general fund budget is $193.6 million for FY25, and that is $7 million more than FY24. And just again, for others' understanding, the general fund is the largest fund that we have with respect to our current services. There are other funds, sometimes enterprise funds like water and sewer, public utilities, special revenue funds like building inspection. Those aren't considered general fund. So when we say all funds, it means the general fund plus those other ones. And so the operating budget for all funds is $300.8 million. Those are operating numbers. The capital budget is separate. Capital budget for all funds is $49 million. So all in, the total operating capital budget for FY25 is $349.9 million, which is $15.3 million more than the FY24 original budget. The millage rate for FY25 is 12.45 mils, which is unchanged from the FY24 rate. And there's property tax information, and I'm going to go to B9 very quickly because this happens every year. And the state mandates the language that's used in the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And sometimes it's often misinterpreted. Commission, it has not, I'm sorry, I'm on B10 at the bottom, B10. And that shows the property tax rates over the last, since 2015. And I would draw your attention not to the total tax rate on the far right, because that includes both the government and the school district. And for every dollar that a taxpayer pays, 60% of that dollar goes to the school district, and approximately 40% goes to the unified government. But the way that Georgia is structured, the government is the one that sends out the tax bills. So that's one thing I'd like to clarify there. Just to the left of that column, you can see that from 2015, the millage rate has actually decreased 1.5 mils. It's gone from 13.95 to 12.45. So I can say with absolute accuracy that this commission or the ones before it have raised the millage rate since 2015 and probably before that. This is just how far back it goes. But there is other forces at work, and that is valuations. And Athens-Clarke County has seen pretty significant growth in property valuations, which drives So your taxes can go up even as if your millage rate's going down as a function of valuation. And we can cover that topic in an ensuing budget workshop, but I just want to be clear for everyone that's paying attention that the commission at this point, or at least last year, did not raise the millage rate, nor the year before that, nor 7 years before that. We'll go back to B1 now. The use of fund balance, the mayor's proposed budget includes the use of 5 million of fund balance, 3.5 million for operating items, and additional for capital. Department request in the draft budget that I proposed to the mayor and then in his ensuing budget, really only a small portion of the requests were actually funded. So I think that's important to know, and I'll go over that here pretty soon. There are 19 new full-time authorized positions across all funds. 13 of those are in the general fund. I do have the handouts. It was asked at the retreat to provide justifications for each of those positions, and I'll hand that out here shortly. The pay adjustment also includes 2.4 million for a portion of the public safety step plan. That's a 4% step table increase, eligible step increases, and impacts from the sheriff's office market survey study. I'm going to skip past the strategic plan. This is important, but not pertinent for my verbal tonight. I'm going to B7, and you can see that so B7 is the general fund, and B8 is all funds. Okay, I'm going to talk more about the general fund tonight. Total revenues and other sources in the FY24 budget was about 186 million. In the FY25 mayor's version, it's 196 million, which is an increase of 3.7% between FY25 and FY24. With regards to expenditures, the FY24 budget is balanced, and that's what we're required to do. So the same figures I just repeated on revenues were what were used for expenditure. Moving on to B9, the total general fund property taxes, of which of the general fund, 51% of the revenues are made up of property taxes. Mr. Hamby mentioned sales taxes. That's also a significant contributor to the general fund revenue. Property taxes are projected to be right at 95 million, and that's 7.3% more than originally estimated for FY24. So there was growth in the digest in valuations. There are also revenues received from the motor vehicle taxes, and we estimate that to be higher than the FY24 budget. And there are other taxes as well, like real estate transfer and intangible recording taxes that contribute to that. Moving on to B11, under the local option sales tax, we're projecting a 3.7 million or 11% increase in FY25 over FY24. The lost revenues over the last 5 fiscal years have averaged about a 7.8% annual increase. And Finance Director Boyd did allude to the fact that there were changes in the way that internet sales taxes were collected, which helped to fuel that. The Department of Revenue collects those taxes. So we are limited as to analyzing what the cause of those increases are, but we do watch, and I do appreciate finance staff providing all of us periodic updates of those sales tax collections and how they compare to surrounding counties. I think that's helpful. Other taxes, and when I say other taxes, I mean franchise fee, insurance premium tax, excise tax revenues, occupation tax certificates, so on and so forth, are estimated to be 1 million higher as compared to the FY24 budget. There are other contributors. Licensing and permits are similar to the FY24 budget. Charges for services are projected to be 1.8 million more than FY24. This would include downtown parking fee revenues, for instance, and other type fees, parking fees, leisure services fees. Fines and forfeitures are estimated to be slightly increased from FY '24. And the use of fund balance to round out the general fund revenue changes, the FY '25 budget plans the use of 6.7 million, I'm sorry, 5 million in fund balance. And that was accounted for in the spreadsheet that Finance Director Boyd went through with you. Moving on to expenses. So I'll stop there. Let me go ahead and get through the expenses and then we'll just, I'll provide some more questions, answers to questions that you ask, and then we can go wherever we want to from there. So with respect to expenses, maintaining current services, I'm going to go through several sections and try and help you understand where the costs are going. And I noted earlier, there's about 13 million in new revenue, and Finance Director Boyd alluded to this, and I want to highlight this. Over the past few years, we have attempted different ways of budgeting for the relative lack, the lack of folks or the number of vacancies that we have. We're starting to fill up, and I think that is indicative of more competitive wages that you've helped to support to bring people back into public service with Athens-Clarke County. So with our ranks filling up, not having to pay as many folks was a bit of a latent reservoir, if you will, for funds. And that is exactly what Mr. Boyd was saying, is that now that we're filling up, that flexibility, those salary savings, that extra money that was accruing in the unreserved fund balance, that's just not going to be there like it was before. And it is a significant impact. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the first 3 million of the new revenue is simply just to pay folks who are returning to fill the positions in the government. Before anything else, any new things or anything like that. One of the categories of expenses that we always track is maintaining current services. That's the services that our residents have come to expect and hopefully value. And the budget includes increases totaling about 1.6 million for current services. I'll call out some of those by example, but by contrast, I did recommend only about 30% of what the actual request was. So the requests were close to $5.5 million, and we've allowed for 1.6 million. And fully a third of that was through the mayor's ad of the alternative response team. So $500,000 to support that program in FY '25. We also have had some increases in our software maintenance agreements totaling about $200,000. And for the sheriff's office, we've had increases in inmate healthcare and extradition expenses of about $200,000. So that accounts for over half, just those three things I've shared with you, over half of the increase, the 1.6 million in maintaining current services. And on page B15, you can see the rest of those, but I'll save you going through each one line by line. Moving on to B16, another category of expenses we track is new initiatives, additional positions, and SPLOST impacts and other changes. And so there was a request from departments of over 6.3 million. And this budget, the mayor's budget, only includes 1.2 million of those increases. Said a different way, 80% of the requests were denied. And these requests, y'all, they're not frivolous. They're things that we need to do that support the direction that this community wants. And so I just want to, there are choices being made and priorities being made. Certainly, we're not granting every request that comes forth. Some examples of these new initiatives, of the 1.2 million, I'll account for several. $250,000 of that is for fire. And that is 3 new full-time firefighter EMT positions and an EMA coordinator position. And the 3 positions is part of a 3-year plan to better fully staff our fire department so that when we're getting more and taller buildings, it takes personnel to have a safe approach to firefighting in taller buildings. The taller it is, you got more folks that are involved and a bigger perimeter. So all that being said, this became abundantly clear to us a couple of years ago, and we're trying to be on a responsible path to incrementally increase that over time where it's not a big jolt to the budget. And then essential services, we are adding a facilities rehab crew, which will be using some returning services, returning residents to help save us money from hiring contractors to do work, but at the same time teaching trade. And so when these folks are able to repay their debt to society, that they are able to get gainful employment and become productive members of society. Matter of fact, we hope that these folks will work for us. And that's what the intent of that program is. While it's not in the general fund, I do want to call out an addition the mayor has made in the Affordable Housing Fund, in that he has set aside $1 million. He's proposing to set aside for an Affordable Housing Strike Fund, which I think is congruent with some of the recommendations that came out of the Affordable Housing Investment Strategy. We'll jump over to B18 real quick. And on B18, I'm not going to go through it, but B18 basically is a summary of all the full-time authorized position changes, which includes 13 positions in the general fund and 6 in other funds. And again, I'm going to hand you out very shortly a justification for each one of those positions. Moving on to B20. I've gone over current services, new initiatives, SPLOST impacts, but perhaps the biggest expense of the new revenue that is occurring is in compensation and benefits. And I want to thank the commission for investing in employees in a time when we saw huge vacancies that really pushed people to their limits of trying to cover. And that can be a self-perpetuating prophecy. Folks are having to work so much overtime, and we've spent a good bit of overtime. And I believe that one reason why we're filling back up, the economy notwithstanding, is that we do have more competitive salaries and benefits, and that's due to this commission and those before you. With respect to all funds, it's going to be an increase of $5 million. In the unified plan, so we have 2 separate pay plans, y'all, one for public safety and then one for all others. And the all others is what we call the unified plan. So these are non-public safety folks. And in the mayor's proposed budget, there's a 4% market adjustment. That represents about a $1.3 million expense in the general fund and a 3% pay table adjustment, which is $200,000. So I'd like to explain that very quickly because that doesn't sound right. 4%, 3%, and there's a difference of 1.1 million. The pay table, the market increases are for all employees that have been hired before January 1st of this year. That's a 4% increase to their salaries. Some folks may call that a cost of living adjustment, but that's what that amounts to. And the 3% pay table adjustment is how we maintain our compensation plan, our pay and classification plan. And what that is, that those funds are set there to elevate all of the minimums across the various job classes and pull it up, okay? Now, the reason why the market increase is 1% more than the pay table adjustment is to avoid compression. So you lift everybody up 4% and you bring up the minimums behind them to 3%. So it doesn't cost as much because you're not actually paying people those dollars, but that's for future folks that come in later at a higher minimum salary. And you do that every year. And that's how you try to keep your pay competitive until you get to that next waypoint to where you do another pay study. Okay. So between those two, that's 1.5 million of the new revenue for non-public safety employees. For the public safety folks, the increase or the use of the new revenue is more like 2.5 million. So between the two and all the employees, 4 million of the 13 is going for these increases in the general fund. 3 million is just to pay the new folks that are coming back. So of the 13 million, 7 million is just for compensation. And that is not out of the ordinary. I believe of all the expenses in the general fund, somewhere around 70% of them are just purely compensation. We're service driven. We provide services and people that work for us provide those services. In the public safety step plan, there's a 4% pay table adjustment. And then we, of course, we're going to fund all the scheduled step increases as per the plan design. In addition to that, another 1.2 million of additional overtime funding in the budgets for police, fire, and sheriff. And these are the ones that have incurred the most overtime expenses. We are filling up though, some at different rates. Chief Salters reported recently, I think that between the folks that are out there right now and the folks in training that we're getting close to filling up on the police. That's something I've not seen in a decade. And again, I think that speaks to the incremental and consistent investment that this commission is making in our employees. Employee health, I know it was important. We had a comp and benefits work session. And we got a response from this commission that don't want to give a raise and then take it away by increasing the health insurance premiums. And so the commission gave that direction, and the mayor has responded in his budget by holding employee premiums at FY24 levels for FY25. And with regard to the pension program, contribution to the pension trust fund is 1.6 million more than the amount in the FY24 budget. And that's called the annual required contribution. That's the figure that's provided to us by actuaries. And it's a function of, the folks that we have, the actuarial tables, the pay, what the rate of pay is. And of course, the value, the market performance. And we just had a recent pension committee meeting, and Chairman Mike Hamby presides over that. There's some information there that we'll share with you in the next meeting, perhaps, about what that looks like. But I want to say that that our fund has performed very well under the guidance of that committee, comprised of commission staff, retirees, and I think it works very well. And so annual required contribution is something that we look at. We do have pension credits that accumulate from time to time by changes in any one of those variables that I mentioned before. And we are trying to responsibly use those and bring that annual required contribution up to the required level without credits over the next few years. So with that, that is my review of the mayor's recommended budget in terms of revenues and expenditures. I'm glad to hand out some answers to some questions you've had before. But Mayor Pro Tem, I'm glad to take any questions for staff that you have right now.
I have some questions, if you don't mind, based on some of the information you have. So the information that you're handing out to us, is there like a portal we put it on the website so that the public can see what we're seeing as far as what you're about to hand out and what you've also handed out?
I think
is there a way to do that? I mean, just, on the page or something like.
Sure.
So that that's being transparent. But also, you mentioned that there was an 80% denied list of department requests. Can we see what that denied list entails?
Sure. And that will be part of the spreadsheet that we plan to share.
Okay.
And on your first one, yes, I agree with that. And because there are questions that accumulate over time and it's hard to remember what was asked and what was answered,
Right.
what I'm proposing is that staff, we just create a document that aggregates it over time. And we just keep adding questions, but we don't lose the old ones.
Right.
So you have it all in one setting.
Kind of like what we did for the TAD. Yeah.
Patrick. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, Blaine, for this. Can you go over the rehabilitation crew program? And what department would that individual go under?
Facilities, it's central services.
Commissioner? And again, to Mr. Hamby's question, there were a number of things that were funded. Well,
B
the
16,
general.
B16.
central services. So that's, so that would be equivalent to the,
Sure, that's where it's mentioned. I was looking for the detail, Commissioners. So basically, that is a crew, like I said, of returning residents. So part of that money is for the salary. An employee to work with those, a non-returning resident employee, a civilian employee, if you will, that will oversee that. And then there are some also some first-year costs that are associated with that we need to purchase. What is not in there, and something that is something for y'all to consider adding in, is a truck for that crew. That was not included, unfortunately. But the idea is that this crew, for instance, we did a pilot with the paint crew this past year and found it to be successful. So instead of contracting out to private, companies that provide painting services, we would like to use our returning residents to do that and save some of that markup that goes on, and at the same time, teach them a trade.
so I'm a third away through this budget, so central service, there will be like litter pickup.
Yes, it's a different version of that, exactly.
Okay.
Carol, is it anything more than litter pickup?
It's painting. This crew.
This
Yeah,
crew is painting.
paint crew.
That's what it's gonna be for this.
It's in addition to the litter crew, but it's the same model, right? That we have a full-time employee overseeing several folks, and they're out there doing things.
Yeah, I've got a handful of questions and notes that I'll take. So the overall property tax revenue total increase is 7.3%. I'm interested to know if that differs, how that differs from the overall assessed value increase for homestead exempt properties versus, say, commercial or non-exempted properties. And possibly a heat map for those assessment increases. Are they increasing more in particular areas? I don't know how easy it is to pull that data. If it's fairly easy to pull that, I'd be interested in seeing that. I'm also really concerned about these public safety services and our need to keep investing more and more in public safety because of the pressures the university is putting on our community. And I bring this up every year. I've been bringing it up for probably 10 years. We spent, what did we spend, like $10 million recently on new fire trucks? We talk about the tall buildings, the needs for those tall buildings are housing students. UGA does not have a fire department. I'd really like to see us reach out to the university and ask them to contribute to the expense of these services. It's super important that we have this equipment and we have the ability to serve those buildings. And there are more tall buildings on campus. I'm also concerned about the expense our police force invests in game day services. How much overtime are we paying? Does the university compensate for any of that? There's definitely an impact on nonprofits, because we do not issue special event permits for the entire weekend on game days. So these nonprofits are losing potential fundraising opportunities. They often end up having conflicting fundraising opportunities that bring in less revenue. So I'd really like, other communities do this. It's completely the norm in other college towns to ask the university of that town to contribute to public safety funds. As well as our affordable housing fund. It's clear that, that the increased population of students is definitely putting pressure on our local housing market, as well as, the game day tourism and the Airbnbs that result from that, pulling housing off the market. We have this strike fund as part of our recommendations from that affordable housing plan. It's asking us for $5 million to properly make up for the the affordable housing needs in our community. We're only gonna give $1 million towards it. The rest of that money has to come from somewhere. And I feel like it should come from the forces that are actually putting pressure on our housing market. I think, I want to see about that conversation. I also have questions about the new positions, the operational analysis position are we gonna have that public safety oversight board monitor that is supposed to, is that committee, that management analyst gonna be,
This would provide that function.
that will provide, okay, that's good to know. Thank you. And I have a question about our police force being fully staffed. I think that's great. We're hearing from the public that this recommended full staffing is not the recommended staff level that is supposed to be recommended for a population. I'm not sure if they're also considering UGA's police force. So I'd just like to clarify that, you know, the total numbers of officers in our community meet those exterior expectations.
Well,
I can send you these in the
That-
email if you like.
Well, in the first two, I do believe that we can provide you through the tax assessor's office what the increase in valuation was in aggregate. The heat map, I will ask. See if they can accommodate, you know, between tax assessor and our chief data officer. We'll see if we can.
I mean, I know we're supposed to be contracting a consultant to do that kind of work through our future land use planning process. I know that was in this year's budget, so I kind of presume they're gonna do some of that, but that's not happening for another couple. Have we secured that contractor yet?
Yes, Urban Three.
Okay, when will they start doing work?
I think they have started preliminary work on that.
Okay, so you think, what, are we expected to see a report?
Couldn't answer that, certainly get an answer for you then.
Okay, yeah, I'm interested to see how to know how that's going.
Well, and, you know, we have invested more in GIS, Geographic Information Services. The tax assessor is part of that as our chief data officer. So we may be able to generate something internally, you know, kind of on a countywide level.
Sort of a related issue that often comes up in these conversations is the amount of new construction valuation versus those just valuation increases of existing properties. So maybe we could get that as well.
I'm particularly interested in homestead, residential homestead exempted properties.
The appraisal,
Yeah, if I
geographic.
yeah, I mean, are the property values for these going up in certain areas than others?
Well, and Mayor, I appreciate you saying that because that's an important distinction as you try and understand what is not immediately intuitive about this. And so property valuations are driving the increase in the digest, that are driving the increase in taxes because the millage rate is either decreased or stayed static. And that increase in valuation, y'all, are due to new construction, as the mayor pointed out, or rehabs. And I know in the neighborhoods near my home, a lot of folks are investing in their homes and they're increasing square footage and, you know, and then there are folks that haven't done anything, but they live near newer construction and rehabs. And so unfortunately, they get the benefit of higher tax values as well. And so there are really three different ways that valuation increase. And all of that, y'all, doesn't even mention commercial. So, you know, that's part of that.
I have a question. I'm curious, are you wanting this staff to spend time giving you these different things because you want to raise the millage rate?
No, I'm just curious about how the data applies, you know, because we hear things from the community, from homeowners in different parts of the community. And, you know, some people's taxes increase 3%, some increase 10%.
Right.
I think we need to get a picture of, you know, what the parts of the community that are most impacted by those rising rates.
But as far as for the budget, what would we get? Because we can't just pick on certain categories to.
Well, we're hearing from constituents who are concerned about their homes, you know, and the homestead exemption is not helping them that much because their values are rising extremely high in some places and a little bit more stable in others. You know, I think that would be helpful to know, you know, if we're interested in lowering or raising the millage rate, I think we need to understand what parts of the community are actually being adversely impacted by those higher tax rates.
I would have to say everybody's adversely affected. I don't think anybody's
I mean, it's,
happy about.
in some places, you might be seeing people are only having like a 3 or 5% increase. In other places, it's their.
But isn't that all what Manager Williams is talking about? I mean, there's more than one factor
Yeah.
that could be impacting higher, and my property taxes did not go up. Don't tell nobody. But my school taxes, which went up. So maybe somebody needs to be talking to the school
Tell you that
also. I'm just saying, some of this is going up because of the school too. It's not all on us.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's different, I mean, as we approach our zoning too, I mean, I've seen some recent data that's been collected from the geography department. They've done a study of East Athens, and it's pretty enlightening to see the impact.
Well, maybe you need to share that with staff instead of ask staff to share it with.
They'll be sharing it with all.
Okay, that'd be fine.
Can we move on to kind of any other questions?
Wait a minute. Commissioner Davenport has this.
Well, if I might, y'all, just a little more clarity on this, okay? I'm sorry, Commissioner. So it is a mass appraisal system, okay? It's not as if you're gonna get this personal, detailed appraisal for each one. And the base value, y'all, is based on a number of factors, the amount of square footage that's heated and cooled, and even some of the characteristics, brick versus wood, so on and so forth. But where the change is really, so there's a base value for everybody. And I don't want to oversimplify this because the tax assessor's job does a great job, and they do it within the limits that are prescribed by the state of Georgia. They have to go get that tax digest certified each year, and there's a range in which they have to be with their mass appraisal. But what I'm telling you is it has to do with sales, okay? So sales in your neighborhood, if they're up a certain percentage point and they're comparable, then that's how everybody gets swept up with it. And so it's not any number that this body says we need to get to this number to raise so many taxes. It is market forces at work, and we have trained appraisal folks who go out there and take all this information, and that's how those valuations are judged. Now, there is due process, there's an appeals process, and it's used quite extensively. And we have a board of assessors who the tax assessor works for. Tax assessor doesn't work for me. And they have those hearings and the Board of Adjustments, and they go through that whole thing. So there is a process that has gone on for years, but those are the factors for folks that are trying to make sense of these increases, because they are substantive.
Commissioner Davenport.
I didn't have a question, but I do want to clarify. We're just asking questions on the budget. We're not asking.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure. So like the presentation and the information that you're about to give us, you want us to ask questions on those, not to dive too deep into the budget to ask for like additional programs, correct?
I'll go anywhere that the facilitators want us to go. Well, I don't mean that there'd be any mystery around this. Why don't we go ahead and hand out those documents so folks can see that? And then we're here as long as you want to be to answer questions you have.
I do have something relative to the budget on the revenues. And I'm wondering, and we discussed this at the retreat about ARPA funds. And we talked about, was it roll into the general funds? So I'm assuming, since we wanted it to be spelled out, I'm on B7.
B7?
47. I'm wondering, is the ARPA funds included where it says other revenues? Because I really expected it to stand out by itself.
Yes, and there is, I'm trying to find it in the B section, there's a paragraph on ARPA. And what I'd like to see. Sorry, y'all. Yes, thank you, Commissioner Myers.
What?
B17. So, and Mayor Pro Tem, I appreciate that point, and I would like to ask that maybe the group consider at one of the upcoming budget meetings that maybe we carve out some time for ARPA discussion only and try and find out where you want to go. there were conversations about the interest earned on ARPA for example, and how you want to apply that. With respect to the budget summary on B17, the last commission set aside some funds for budget balancing, and it was sort of, the year one was where the most was given. And I think it was like 2.1 million, or something along those lines to help balance the budget that they were trying that they enacted at the time. And so if you don't use any more ARPA funds, then the first 2.1 million of revenue in the ensuing year goes to fill that hole. And so the commission decided over the life of ARPA that we would step down the use of that to help balance the budget, so that when the ARPA funds are gone, it's not a big jolt to the budget or an increase in revenue that we're seeking. So, Tim, I don't believe I've answered your question, but I'd like.
That's the way I wanted you to answer it. I really thought at the last retreat, we shouldn't retreated so much. There was a meeting and I thought we said that we wanted those dollars on an itemized line. No, regardless of what the past commission said, we just wanted to. Now, it may go to general funds, it may just end up there, but I would have expected to see it on the B7. I would not expect to look, I did look at B17, so I would have expected to see as a line item on B7.
So far, we have not moved additional dollars to the general fund. And so that's why they rest separately, anticipating some non-general fund expenditures.
But if we don't write it down, somebody's not going to be paying attention and they're going to disappear.
Well, we do have a handout that has all of I think the latest one, Assistant Finance Director Caldwell, latest one included the ARPA interest, or is that still cataloged? Okay. So the only ARPA money that was missing from that table that we handed out, and I will include it with the packet that we will have out there. So that, I think it's about 2.3 million of interest earnings of ARPA at that point. And it's going to continue to earn some interest. It was revenues from our investments, and we usually put those in the fund balance. And then we understood from you in a recent meeting that you don't want that grouped in there. You want it called out separate. And so the next iteration of the table that the commission would like, we can show it there. And what we'll have to do is just deduct that from.
Even if you put it in there and you put a little asterisk right next to it and then make a statement on the bottom, I think that would be clear.
No problem. On the table that we've handed out that has all the ARPA expenditures and how much.
On the table that says revenue, unless you're saying ARPA funding is totally separate. Are you saying that ARPA is totally separate? Okay, so then we'll just put a little note here because I just needed to see it in the budget, not in a narrative. That's okay.
Is that interest, can we use it for anything?
Yes. Not, well, when I say anything, let's be clear about that. If it is, and I may have to ask staff about this, it's interest earnings. So it's not federal money. And so we cannot use it. So the distinction, y'all, between federal and local funds, which you know full well, but for the benefit of the public, is that the state of Georgia has something called a gratuities clause, which prevents you from just giving money to people. The federal government does not have to adhere to the state constitution. And so when we receive CDBG funds, home funds, we can give those directly to direct beneficiaries. Local funds, you can't do that with because of the gratuities clause. Because it was federal money, but it earned interest that's not necessarily federal, we consider those local funds. So they can't be spent on anything, but they can be spent on anything that we normally do as a local government.
We could use it against our capital expense.
Absolutely.
Well, I guess the thought of it is, when we're talking about the shrinkage of the fund balance, that I don't have no problem. That makes sense to me. But I was under the impression that the interest should be used on the same categories that all the ARPA money. Now, maybe that's our confusion. I thought that the interest had to be used for the categories or the criteria that the original ARPA money had.
Well, if you would, I'd like to consult staff and attorneys on that, and we'll mark that question down and add that to the list.
If you're right, it doesn't matter. You know, we just like to know where it's at. But if I'm right, it needs to be spelled out.
You make a good point.
Yeah, and along with that, there are these special fund revenues back at E8, E12, which we looked into. I don't know if the SPOS is in there or not, but those are funds. Of course, the SPOS you cannot move out of there, but you have all the TAD funds in the back and such. So, what I'm thinking in terms of the ARPA funds being in here, and I don't know why, like, do they count as special revenue funds? Could there be, it's just like in this sheet in here, could you have an ARPA sheet in here?
Well,
Is that the same category of funds in a way?
We can, it's not included in there. It's sort of like the SPLOST. It's not annually appropriated. It's appropriated at one time. And so the ARPA is the same way. It's a special programs fund or special revenue fund, but it's not, there's not annual appropriations to it.
Right.
But we can provide you information on that fund.
So, but in a sense, so, instead of like about it, it's different from the SPLOST because we continue to do SPLOST, and the ARPA is just there just in terms of what the community has and what we're working on evaluating. Where in the SPLOST, we couldn't take any of the SPLOST funds and decide to move them as revenue replacement. But with the ARPA, we could, so it would be nice to have it right here. I know you gave it to us last week, but it would be nice to have it close by so we could have it in here,
What I'd like to propose, if y'all agree, is that we just add that line item of interest earnings to the spreadsheet you've already compiled. And we'll include that with the questions and answers, so it's all there for people, if you agree.
Yeah, we can add it to the.
But, and I want to be clear, if we're gonna put it somewhere else, then we're gonna need to take it. I think, and in your final budget decision, you will decide how it is listed. And so we'll take it where it is right now in unallocated fund balance, and we're going to put it in this ARPA for the sake of everybody understanding. So I think it's 2.3 million, 2.4. It's probably a little bit more now because of interest rates. But you'll see a corresponding reduction in those fund balance figures that just tonight, Finance Director Boyd shared.
We talked about this before about the pros and the cons of moving it to the fund balance, being able to give us more time to get some things done, to meet those deadlines. I'm not opposed to that at all.
Sure.
I just want to be able to track it and be able to look at it. Now, I'm gonna open up another can of worms, because when we talk about SPLOST funds and TSP and all that stuff, I'm assuming we're talking about the funds that we've raised, right? What comes in through those sales tax. But are we also looking at the interest on that?
Yes.
So when I look at the big SPLOST, whatever that bucket is, so am I also looking at
Interest earnings.
the interest?
Yes, ma'am.
Mhm.
That stays in SPLOST.
Okay.
And as that grows over time, we haven't done it of late, but periodically we'll come to you. And in fact, in this budget, when a SPLOST passes, the commission meets after the SPLOST and they set a tiering schedule, and a tier equals a year. So if it's a 10-year SPLOST, there's 10 tiers, and we project out the revenue and we list all the projects and we project out the expenses, and some get to go early depending on what you say, and some get to go later. Interest earnings stay in that. And then there comes a time that staff will, ask that you consider some tiering changes based on that influx of revenue. Invariably, some projects maybe come under budget or over budget, so there's some reallocations there. But yes, ma'am, just like you're asking for ARPA, that dynamic already exists with SPLOST. Interest stays in there.
Okay.
It has to stay in there. It can't be used anywhere else.
That's right.
Okay.
Commissioner Davenport?
Yes, I'm sorry. Budget question, for, and I'm sorry, Mayor and Manager, I've not fully read this thing yet, but I just know in the past, we talked a lot about adding additional support to code enforcement. And that, under the building inspection fund, there's just one position for building inspections. In your budget, do you add, add more support to code enforcement for STRs, for, the additional workload there?
There's nothing specific to that. I anticipate that that's probably going to be one of those phenomena that sort of unfolds over time. Just as we come into more clarity about just what it means on the ground to have an STR ordinance.
Well, I can answer that, Mayor, but I don't want to interrupt anybody.
I'm done.
So, and in the handout, yes, sir, and I know you hadn't had a chance to see it. Commissioner, were you asking what the purpose of it was, or what?
No, in the budget, do we have more support for coding under buildings?
Well, I'm not sure we're adding anybody in this budget.
Okay.
I'll have to go back and see if it was requested, but are you asking specifically for short-term rentals?
No, I'm just saying like, just in general, because
Okay.
that's gonna come into fruition hopefully soon, that, that department's gonna need additional staff, so.
Yes.
We're forward thinking, go ahead and have that position ready.
And I think with the STR improvements, there's some talk of that was, trying to oversee that program. But I'm glad you brought it up because this is something that's not known by many. But building inspection, the building inspectors are funded by the fees that are paid by the permittees. Code enforcement is general fund, so they're separate. It's the same department, but they have two different revenue sources because code enforcement isn't fee driven and it is a benefit for all residents. This is similar, while I'm there, about like solid waste. The collections division is funded by fees, but leaf and limb is provided to all residents. So even within that cost center, you've got general funds and fee-driven services as well.
Just a moment, Commissioner, who had his hand.
I have more questions than I'm going to ask right now. Taking turns. But the first is, it's the page B21, when you're talking about the pension. I know you said there's some more information for that forthcoming. Do you have a sense of what that translates to for a given person in terms of what they can expect to see as an increase based on what's in here?
It's not increases. It's just to fund the current methodology, which is basically years of service times 0.185. And times your highest years of salary, and this is your pension benefit. And currently our pension is not structured for any type of annual cost of living increase. That is only granted at the behest of the commission upon advice from the pension committee.
Okay, and so that increase in overall expenditure, just because there's more people on the program now, is that?
Well, it's a lot of different variables. I don't know, Commissioner Hamby, did you want to?
Well, I will. I mean, I think it's as a result of more people in the program, more people retiring to be part of it. Certainly the raises that we've generated over the past few years have impacted what we're liable for paying out of the general fund. And I think that has, certainly that probably generated a lot of retirees become part of it. I will say this, the pension fund, the beginning of the year of April 2023 was about $280 million. And right now it's roughly about $320 million.
And we were just reviewing those results of the last one. And Commissioner Hamby, I think I commented when I came here and started serving on the pension committee, I think we were around 180 million. And so I want to tell the employees that the pension committee is doing, I think, a fantastic job. Commissioner Hamby's dead on, increasing salaries, numbers of people vesting and things of that. But I think the biggest swing in annual required contribution is usually determined by market performance. And I noted in our last one that we've averaged, I think, since inception, close to 8%. Even though the pension committee and our actuaries caution us that we may not get those returns in the future, and we continue to try and bring that discount rate down But we're doing that incrementally, just like many other things here, to avoid any shocks to the budget.
Commissioner Hamby, do you have a sense of what you / the pension committee might recommend in terms of a COLA or not?
We've been looking at several different factors, and the two that have come close to the top are ways that we can recruit new employees and also retain existing employees. And so there's two things we're looking at. The first one to recruit new employees is to change for new employees to change the vested time period from 10 years to 5 years. And they will then pay into the system at 5%. And then they get a multiplier at the end of their service and whatever at 2%, as opposed to the 1.85. So that hopefully will help recruit, or not, well, it will help recruit and retain employees. We found that most new employees are lasting, and Lori's here lasting. Am I right in saying this, Lori? Like, do we learn is like between 5 and 10 years, and then they might move on to somewhere else. So
I think historically 6 to 8 years, but now it's more like 3 to 5. And so we're trying to keep those people around.
So we're trying to, because you can imagine the cost of training and stuff like that adds on to the expense of it. So we're trying to retain and recruit employees, and for long-term employees that have perhaps been over here for 10 years, or to keep it going, we're changing the what do we do? We allowed them to, right now you can work 32 years and get 1.85 without a penalty. So we're raising the age limit to 35 instead of 32 at 35 years of service without any of the penalties. So, and that's been something that's been the pension board since Harry Sims was on. It used to be 30. Yeah, it did. So it's gone up to 35, and we're continuing to look at other ways to retain long-term employees too.
So that's all super encouraging for
but it's not going to have any impact on the budget.
That's right. It's revenue neutral because those employees in diminishing or 10 to 5 years, but they're paying 5% of their salary into the plan for the first 5 years until they vest. And as Commissioner Hamby said, they do get a difference in a multiplier just for the new employees. But that actually saves us $500,000 in the near term, but it's $6 million cost over 30 years.
Over 30 years, it is.
And
but
then
hopefully over 30 years, the pension fund will be making more money.
That's right.
That is all helpful information, and I appreciate that. But I'm just, for people who are already retired, is there any kind of recommendation from the pension committee around a COLA?
Not currently, not since we did the last one.
And that was 2 years ago, I believe. And that was, that was a $75 increase per month per retiree. And it had the net effect of a cost of $1 million a year or 10 million over 10 years.
I think we have increased their health benefit, though, if I'm not mistaken, this year. It's part of it, but
Help the premium. Help the premium.
the money we give them each month has increased.
That's right.
I don't know if that's something we want to think about. I mean, that was a substantial impact on the budget a couple of years ago, but cost of living has gone up quite a lot for everybody here. So if we've got retirees that are staying flat the past couple of years, I think I've received the same emails everyone here has from a couple of different people who are expressing that concern. So I don't know if that's something we want to consider. The other question I had, the list of unfunded requests in the mayor's budget, which, like, if I look at last year's very awesome list of questions report, I think it was attachment 1. I think we've had this every year. But is that going to include the capital requests? You mentioned the van for the paint crew. Will that also be on that list?
We can provide printouts. We've gone to a new, in trying to get a better handle on life cycle cost and a capital improvement program. We have, finance is now using a new software that we catalog that for the, it used to be spreadsheets and now it's in the cloud, and that's how I fill it out. That's how the mayor reviews it. So we can provide you printouts of all of the capital requests and which ones were funded, if that's what you're looking for.
I suppose that would be helpful. I mean, I guess I'm just wondering, you happen to know about the van request that came up today and you mentioned it, but what else, if we don't know to ask, is floating out there?
The capital requests are already in there. D section, if you look at the summary, it says what was requested and what is recommended.
Yeah, I was mistakenly looking at detail and didn't see that the summary up front has it. Great, never mind. So I don't think we really need.
That was deep.
The operating.
You know when we'll get that, just so we have it.
Well, so I thought I just heard that they're in D section, so.
When we'll get the operating rates though.
Oh, well. I guess y'all are cleaning up some details, but I think in the next week or so.
Next week.
So I remember Commissioner Fisher asked for it a while ago too, but just feel like that could potentially be like a big part of what we talked about here. So, I have one more question before I pass it on. I had asked by email about the bulletproof vests. You know, we had that presentation from the chief at our retreat on the 3rd, and then there's been some emailing back and forth. A number of us met with the gang task force to get input from them, but there's these high caliber bullets that make up a lot of what's flying around out there, and the existing vests that ACCPD uses to protect them against those. So could you add whatever information we're getting to this list of questions for that too?
Yes.
And do you happen to know offhand whether those are, the vests that we got are the kind that are like strong enough, the level 4 or whatever vest that protects against those armor penetrating bullets?
I believe only for the SRT team, but let me confirm that with Chief Salters.
Because I think what I was interested in is what would be the cost of having those available for anyone on the PD who wants them, not just those special teams, since we have lots of folks out there who might be responsible for all of those things. We're getting fired at them. So
thank you.
I've asked Jesse to recap all of his questions and send it to everybody.
That would be helpful.
they're all in here except for that one.
So we're good, but hold on. Yes, you, Commissioner Myers, then Commissioner Fisher.
Yeah, from those vests, just on that, I specifically asked about that yesterday, and I thought they were not even for the special unit to the highest caliber that was needed. So I'm not sure on that. On the code enforcement, just recalling what we talked about this morning, Manager Williams, did you say, was there a position from last year that was focused on apartments and that is just being funded or just filled? Did we, I can't remember what you said on that. And then I have another question about retirement.
Okay, and we'll give you a more full answer, but my memory serves me, and some of the commissioners were here when this happened, but some time ago, probably 2018-ish or so, 2017-ish, the commission, we had a study of multifamily apartments that were done through ACD, and there was some emphasis from the commission on better maintenance, inspections and that type of thing. And at the same time, there was a special revenue fund set up for affordable housing. And so I believe that position is funded out of there and ostensibly to go and review, maintenance issues, multifamily. But I'll verify all that and we'll get that in the end.
And whether or not it's been filled.
Yes.
Right. Okay, then the other question about the employee retirement, catching on a little more each year. Our employees, you mentioned the new plan, Mike, where someone would be putting in 5%. And the majority of our employees haven't put anything in. Is that correct?
That's exactly right.
Okay, so is there also in our HR department a hearty, and how long's it been going on, hearty attempt for, as a state employee, I gave a bunch of money into TRS every year. Is there a hearty program to get people to put money into some 403 whatever's, yeah.
Yes.
So I just am bringing that up and I assume that was the answer. So for our employees, there is that, whatever that investment is, the Social Security that they're getting, and then also the pension from the county, listed, right?
And we can also do that program for 1K.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah,
We qualified to do that as well.
right, well,
HR's got that set up.
yeah.
So John chairs that.
So I won't belabor it too much, but just to be clear for folks that don't know, so we do have a defined benefit pension, which is what we've been talking about. And I really appreciate where the pension committee is going on this, that, reducing the vesting period, because it's an issue of portability for folks that did want to be here for 10 years. We do have a deferred comp program, and we do have the deferred comp committee chaired by Commissioner Culpepper. And we do offer 457 and 403B, I believe, where we have a matching program for up to 1% So yeah, there's a couple of different ways to save your retirement here.
Could we find out what percentage, how many employees actually participate in those programs?
Yes, and I will say, it was a policy of the deferred comp program that new hirees are automatically enrolled. And we talked about that, that was strategic. And I do want to say again that, you know, it's important for employees to be able to transition when they're ready to. And so we want to give different avenues for them to save. And what we found is that folks are not opting out, they just weren't opting in as actively. So just automatically enrolling them, they're fully aware of it, has greatly upped the participation rate.
Commissioner Fisher?
Thank you. And Commissioner Biden asked some of the questions I'll get from a parent standpoint. The UGA, we was, once you get hired, you automatically is in the comes out of your salary on top, like taxes. It goes toward the man get matched. And I know you just given us on the positions that we asked to take a look at. And with us becoming fully employed within our departments, our hope, and again, I want to go this and be fair about it, but if we're becoming more fully employed, the necessity of adding 19, that's the 23 positions, the impact on us from a financial standpoint, but again, I want to be fair and take a look at it and then maybe come back with some answers. But, I know we have a tough time trying to hire people, and that's picking up, and I think that's great. That's happening. So if that's the case, then the departments will function the best they could. If they're picking up positions that they need to fill, then we talk adding 19, 23 more positions. You may take a look at it.
I hear you. Well, I tell you, burnout's a very real thing with our existing employees, and I can talk to HR staff about that. And I appreciate your point, sir. And I would point you to B20, just for the benefit of the residents and the public that are watching. And at the top, 19 positions seems like an awful lot. But there are other dynamics at work. This is a growing community. There's more folks that need services. And so a statistic that we use as sort of a gut check is the number of employees per 1,000 residents. And, the difference between this year and last year is 0.1. So, community's growing. We're kind of growing and trying to flex. I'll also say that in the past several years, the commission has directed us to do more and different things. I think HCD has grown significantly. There's been a lot of emphasis on social services and working with nonprofits. And on the public safety side, we've had growth as well.
I got one more.
I'm sorry.
Mayor, on the right fund, $1 billion. So if we fund that, are we plan on trying to use that money in the very near future, or are we trying to build a strike fund?
That's a great question. I appreciate you asking, Commissioner. So if we think about the affordable housing work we've done, particularly over the last few years, we of course historically had benefited from federal home funds and some CDBG funds and a little bit of local funds, mostly through the accumulated payment and move taxes that the Housing Authority pays to us. In the 2010 SPLOST, there had been a small affordable housing fund. And then obviously in the 2018 SPLOST, we had a very significant affordable housing fund, the bulk of which went to the kind of North Downtown project. Those ARPA funds that we've expended somewhere in the neighborhood of, or committed, let me say it that way, somewhere in the neighborhood of $14 million, of course, are going to be hitting the ground, in brick and mortar terms over the next few years. Coming out of the affordable housing needs study that we had, something that we really didn't have any fund for is particularly those properties that a lot of people are seeing in traditional neighborhoods that oftentimes fall dormant and just in many cases aren't used at all. Sometimes those are air properties, sometimes those are abandoned properties. Obviously, as we've seen, and I think I've got even some email conversation about this from the group, those properties either sit there or savvy folks in the real estate market figure out how to get an attorney and, talk to the 10 cousins who own that thing in common. And then it gets put kind of into the private market. What this would really allow us to do is working with a reignited land bank authority, put those into kind of permanent affordability through partnerships with a lot of our affordable housing providers. So it's really intended to, in some ways, extend into a new arena by taking some of those air properties and putting them into productive use for local needs, rather than investor needs. And then it's also really intended to kind of be the bridge to, what I hope to see in a future environment. And so preceding implementation of a FLOSS that you heard David talk about earlier, what we could do is take some of the priorities that we've really invested in through ARPA, affordable housing, including moving people out of homelessness, and youth services, and create some new program categories and fund those, and then implement the FLOSS, and with the FLOSS, effectively fund some of that activity, starting in FY '26. So this is a little bit of a bridge, knowing that, of course, a lot of those ARPA dollars haven't actually hit the ground in terms of seeing brick and mortar activity. Thank you.
I'm going to excuse myself, and I'm going to let the mayor finish this meeting. And I see a lot of our guests have left, but we've got more staff now. And I wanted to remind people that this budget is on the website, but the report that our CFO gave, we could put that on the website. So people who are interested to actually see what we saw as he presented, would that be a problem? So thank you. Excuse me, y'all done a good job.
Question about the FLOSS. So I thought that was supposed to be used to reduce the millage rate. We can't use those funds.
So the way that some communities have done that is they've implemented some new funding and then implemented the FLOSS. And so what you see is some reduction from that new funding. So an example, kind of given the prospects that I just mentioned, is that if you had something like $12 million toward affordable housing and $6 million toward youth services, and you implemented those funding programs, and then you implemented a FLOSS and rolled back, you could effectively roll back half a penny for property taxes, which is 2.4, 2.5 mils. So sequentially, you can do it that way.
But then we would be spending the money
you'd be spending some new revenue. That's right.
I don't know if it'd necessarily be new revenue.
If you created a new funding category, if you created new expenditures and then implemented a FLOSS, you would ultimately end up with a bigger revenue. So if you looked at LaGrange is a good example. So I could show you kind of how they manage their program. And
I guess what I'm saying is if you do that, you still have to roll the revenue source of property taxes back by the same dollar amount that you're investing in, based on what finance director mentioned to you.
you can sequence it. And so I can find out some information about that the GMA's provided.
While we're on this, so I'm going through the affordable housing investment strategy. And, it kind of maps out for anyone who wants to look at this later. It's page 26 of the agenda item back in October. But
Which 26?
It's page 26 of the agenda item back in October from this. So probably not something you have on hand necessarily unless you get your computer in front of you, but that talks about a $5 million local housing fund that then everything else stems from. So are you seeing this strike fund as the beginning of establishing that local housing fund in general, or a separate thing, and then we still have the fullness of that? Because, when I look at how they break up that recommended 5 million, the strike fund is actually kind of separate from that.
So you could certainly think about this both in umbrella terms and then in microcosm terms. So saying, hey, we're going to be doing a bunch of housing things, and here's the first tangible activity we're advancing.
But we'd be, I guess to clarify, like thinking proceeds like, you know, I'm reading this document, or certainly if I'm someone in the community reading this document. Are you? We're still not really setting up the local housing fund, right? We're setting up this other thing separately.
$6 million and 5 million. Is it 1 million for the strike fund and 5 million for the other fund, or is the 1 million part of the 5 million in the plan?
Correct.
That's it.
And then, yeah.
And so this would be after acquisition, for property acquisition.
And so we'd still not be initiating the local housing fund.
And so if you would want to set up sort of an umbrella program of which this was a component, this is something that you could do.
Play bar.
What that cost us.
It's October.
Yeah, it's the October 3rd, 2023 voting meeting, agenda item 22. But I mean, you can also pull it off our website if you go there. Ron?
So the money generated from the short-term rental revenue, does that go into the hotel motel, that fund, or can that money be separated out and used to fund affordable housing?
So so short-term rental, just like a hotel, throws off both hotel motel tax and sales tax. And so the sales tax goes into the general fund, the hotel motel tax goes into the hotel motel fund that has some dictates in state code about how we spend it.
So you couldn't create separated it out from what is actually generated from hotels or motels into something separate that you could use to fund affordable housing?
You could say that you wanted to spend the equivalent of some of the sales tax piece on affordable housing, but the hotel motel tax piece is.
By law, it has to go into the hotel motel.
Isn't that money that's going to the sales tax, with the exception of the loss tax, going to the SPOS program? I mean.
Yeah, it's going to that whole host.
Right, so that money and of course, actually, on the 2020 SPOS, there is an affordable housing bucket that one could put money into. Right? So, right, yeah. That's. You could take all, I mean, in our just talking about affordable housing, you could take all the unassigned, I'm not saying we're doing this, but just as we could take the money and put it all on all the buildings that aren't complete, we could also take all the unassigned interest allocated, let's say we had some, and put it on affordable housing. That's just doable. I'm not suggesting that. But the stuff that comes in from this last program. Because we have an affordable housing bucket in there.
So you're suggesting that we can say, I'm concerned from the.
Yeah, I'm just saying that's like what John is saying, so that sales tax money goes to SPOST, but in fact, there is an affordable housing bucket in SPOST that you could put money into.
That is correct.
Right, so.
While we're talking about SPOS, I'm in here trying to look, and every one of them's different on revenue. Some of them have the revenue that we've generated, some of them don't. Is there a way to have where we stand? Because like I'm looking at 2011 has stuff on here, but then 2018 will have, it doesn't have what's been generated. That makes sense?
No, well, and I will say, every 6 months, we produce a report about SPOS, which captures those interest earnings, and it shows all the funds and it tracks the expenditures and the revenue. So I need to, what I will do is include the latest one of those that would have everything, that has all that. And once you've seen that, Commissioner Culpepper, if you have any further questions, please.
Other questions?
Yeah, I just additional information, just because you won't have it right now. And if you do, it might be too long to answer. So on B17, under major changes, where you've got the manager divisions becoming departments and new org chart, can you put that into a math outline?
Sure.
That shows us the cost with that, including the third manager that you have as a quarter year, right? I'm assuming we still have salary or the second vacant, right? The one that you've listed in here would be for the third. Okay. And then the other thing was, and this kind of relates to some strategy for budget, and you and I had talked about when we have approved budgets and the commissioners have put a little thing in there, one of my things, and Commissioner Link was with me on that, was education on the septic tanks, for
Yes.
example. And we had money for that. So where is that? So that we know, similar to this, that was an idea. And you've also said the more details we give you for
Yes.
our ideas, that
Yes.
the easier it is for it to turn into an action.
Yes.
So how do we learn of our unallocated commissioner topics so that we can maybe not add more money to it, but give you the details you need to move it forward?
Yes, ma'am.
Because so I'm leaning towards not adding new things, but making sure we're giving the details for things have not spent yet.
Yes, thank you for that. I appreciate you bringing that up. So, yes, in the last few years, the commission finalizes the budget usually with a commission-defined option, which amends the mayor's budget. And in the past, it's taken the form of a spreadsheet, a single line item, few words, and an amount. And so, for instance, there was $100,000 set aside for victim mental health. And so when we.
Violence of
Victims of violence.
victims of violence.
And
Help.
the one ACC Gov agency that performs that type of function was a district attorney. So we gave it to them. Afterwards, though, we discovered the author of that actually meant it for something else. And so this year, if you don't mind, not unlike the executive summaries that we have on the agenda items, if the commission can provide that when the CDO comes forth a few sentences about what's intended for it, I think that helps y'all understand what you're voting on. It certainly helps staff. And yes, Commissioner Wright, I've already started trying to collect some information on those past ones. Maybe the septic tank never got spent and it got carried forward. We need to account for that and let you know where it is. The 100,000 on the DA, it got spent. Some other things got spent. So we're going to give you a status report last several years on those CDOs and where we are.
And that can happen in a chance for us to, one, improve our CDO that would be coming forward and percolating. And then, I mean, because I did see on the website under the septic thing that there is a good bit of, but people have to get to that point. And, what would it cost to make sure we have it also in Spanish or so, that kind of thing. But so knowing what money's left to formulate, and anyway, so, but that, and then the new org chart map is
Yeah.
really, and then I have some little things, but I'll put that in an email so
Okay.
that you guys can actually just plug in. It might be that I just didn't find the answer, and you might need that bingo.
No problem. And if it's okay with everybody, recognize that, if we're going to do an aggregate document, any questions you ask are going to be shown, they're going to show up there.
Yep.
So unless you want otherwise, please understand.
Listen.
I also have some questions and commentary on this third manager position. I'm a little concerned that we might be veering into too many cooks territory. And I mean, you guys definitely could use some assistance. I mean, with all the initiatives we have, and I know we're constantly reaching out to you and, but what I'm seeing in this description sounds more like assistance with that kind of outreach and communication and directing people on where to go. Like, I'm kind of wondering if that more of like an outreach director type position. Y'all need like that first line of communication between us and the particular manager that we need to be in touch with, and as well as assorted members of organizations, nonprofits, all these entities that work with government.
Well, what I'd like to offer there, and I won't go too much into it, we can certainly have more time to discuss it. I think it was noted at last Friday's retreat, most everybody remarked on how much is going on, how much things are changing. And certainly in the last 5 years or so, the government, we're doing more than a traditional service delivery. We're getting involved in a lot more. Add to that the 57 million in ARPA funds. Had the commission went ahead and approved the CDBG, that combined with the home and the community partnership program represents 46 new contracts. And the homelessness, sorry, that's all part of that. So as a manager, I have a couple of things to that. We have 41 different agencies, departments, so on and so forth, 28 of which report to the manager's office. With 3 people, that's roughly 10 apiece. So I'm managing those departments. I think a modern government, and certainly a community like Athens, expects me to be out in the community. Now, I'll tell you, spend virtually all day in meetings. And then I get an average of 105 emails a day. And those emails are not all onesies and twosies. I mean, there's some significant questions and analysis that's required. So my workday is meetings all day, emails after that. There's not a lot of room for me to be out there in the community trying to meet folks. This isn't a social thing, y'all. I'm going to do whatever y'all want to do. I only have so many hours in the day. I don't feel like I'm satisfying you on certain levels. When we look at this from a span of control perspective, assistant managers are carrying 10. I did find a study from some years ago where they did a local government survey study of span of control. And they have different, low, high, very high. And, we are at 10. And that doesn't even include, I have 11 bosses. And I am the direct liaison for our constitutional officers and independently elected officials. So in addition to those meetings, in addition to those emails, trying to serve you, the constituent requests that come in, the needs of our constitutional and independently elected officials, we were able to get a third assistant manager. Then I am going to defer. I'm accountable for everything that happens with those departments that answer to me. But I look to the assistant managers to directly manage those. And now we have transitioned from me being the sole respondent to you and your needs to, well, I can't possibly do that. So we have opened up the gates to where the assistant managers are more directly responsible. And so between infrastructure and public safety, which is being proposed for the deputy manager, to community services that are out there, there's a whole, solid waste, elections, all those things. And then we have all the internal departments. I'm asking for a deputy manager to do public safety and infrastructure, an assistant manager, Josh's old position, to be more community service oriented, a third assistant manager, this one, to be over internal services. This will allow me to interact with the public, with you, with our independently elected and constitutional officers, and manage all of that at the same time. So that's what that's about.
It would be a more clear delineation of what each of the
Yes.
assistant managers.
And we do have that org chart
Okay.
proposed, and I will include that in the packet as well.
I got something to add to that if you don't mind, Mayor, and I appreciate you explaining that because, and I think I've shared this before. The big thing for a lot of folks is customer service.
Yes.
And with this new organization where you're doing it, for example, if we're behind on leave the limb or something, I want us to be able to adapt so that we don't get behind or and I brought up grass cutting, so we don't get behind on grass cutting. These are simple things that mean a lot because it reflects how the community, how people coming in the community see and think about the community. And so I guess with your explanation, will constituents see a better, it's fine, but you see what I'm saying? When the boom truck on the leaf and limb thing goes out, or the boom handle, how do we keep the flow going to where constituents not having to see their leaf and limb pile there for an extra month?
Well, it will allow us to be more proactive than reactive. And right now, I think y'all experience some delays in wanting things changed and then actually happening. If I am behind my desk working on a spreadsheet to fix those type of things, I'm not out there, with it, or we're not leading our department directors, just real time, just putting out fires. And where this government performed its best in the past is when we were doing quadrant 2 thinking. We're dealing with important things that aren't necessarily urgent right now, so that we don't have emergencies that we have to react to. So Yes, an additional person will lower the span of control and ostensibly increase the capacity of the 4 folks that are involved to be more proactive than reactive.
And if something comes up, well, remember the incidents we had with the yellow paint truck. So if something comes up, then somebody, I just want us to see us reacting quicker. To say, I know things break, I know things happen, but.
Yes.
But I think we need to react quicker so that the people we serve see us addressing their concerns.
I think part of that too, I won't put it at us being overtaxed, and part of that's been staffing as well, which hopefully will change. I know on my own listserv, neighborhood listserv, somebody pointed out, and I want to say that this reorg is not done flippantly. I did a study of other jurisdictions, mostly university towns in the southeast, to see how they were staffed, okay? And I'll say right now, if you would like to give me the Savannah model, take it. Because it's not just assistant managers. Some, like Auburn or Savannah, they have a whole nother layer of folks. So while Savannah appears on its org chart to only have 1 assistant manager, it has 4 division directors that are somewhere between department directors and assistant managers. So you would have a chief of all public safety, a chief of all infrastructure. And what I'm trying to do is not do that. I haven't asked for an additional position since I've been here. I think we're at a breaking point or tipping point here. And I don't want an influx of a whole nother layer, but I'd rather reduce the spans of control for all the professionals so we can turn the tide.
We did used to have a deputy manager and 2 assistant managers.
Right before we got here.
Yes. That's it. And Ms. Cheney told me that this is, yes. And that's what the model I'd like to get back to if we can.
See, Jesse and Patrick.
I was just gonna suggest, I know you mentioned this before, I think it was at a retreat, but maybe it'd be helpful to provide, in addition to this, just a brief summary, like comparing what other communities have. So
Absolutely.
it's a clearer, like, that we're kind of playing catch up to what peer communities are doing.
Thank you.
But yeah, I support that part of the budget request. I had a couple hopefully small questions. One was, is finance going to provide us with a spreadsheet to work from like you did last year?
Yeah, I was going to ask that too. The Chris Caldwell and Tim Taylor special.
Yeah.
Yes, eventually. Yeah.
Okay.
So that we can make 100 changes to the.
Yeah.
Well, we'll protect all the.
Have every cell locked.
Don't take
You'll have to hold on.
all the
crayon.
cookies home. I'll take all that leftover cookies.
Okay, but yes, we will.
You'll have to explain it to us 10 different times too. So.
Am I correct in assuming there's a few things that'll probably be baked into it like you did last year? For example, the union contract things that we think are kind of
Yes.
required to.
Thank you, Commissioner Houle. There are, and we'll provide you a list after this meeting. There are several items that have come up since the mayor finalized his budget. Mr. Hamby mentioned the pension changes, which are relatively revenue neutral, we think. For instance, I think the governor signed a bill for PTSD support for public safety personnel, which is an unfunded mandate, and that represents $75,000. I mentioned there's a couple of vehicles we'd like you to consider at this point, and then the collective bargaining agreement. The first one that we've ever had, I believe it was a very productive conversation. $600,000 of new funds there that are not in the mayor's budget because he didn't know, because we were in the midst of negotiating that. Now, while we're at that point, if I might, we have been pretty steadfast at this point to try and be consistent. We don't want to create new precedents for different departments. One thing that I think is very important to public safety personnel is how their overtime is booked. Currently, an FLSA, Fair Labor Standards Act, allows a 28-day cycle. But what that does is, just follow me for 1 second. If you're on a 28-day cycle, you work the first week and you get 3 days of overtime, but you get sick a week later, then your overtime goes away and your sick leave fills in. Okay. And that is something that public safety, we've heard for some time that they would greatly appreciate it if we reduce the 28-day cycle to 14 days. And then for a while, we felt like that might be hard to do logistically, but we have converted to Munis. So there have been some things have allowed us to do that. So when we say the $600,000 cost, $500,000 of that, I believe, is for all public safety agencies to convert to that fund. And I'd ask you to ask any public safety personnel that we have their feelings on that, and I suspect you'll hear them say that they support that.
And then one other question. So at our work session in April, on April 9th, we talked with HR a lot about criminal retention and things, and there was that presentation that highlighted a few departments with chronic vacancies. Does HR have any information they could provide, kind of following up on that, for additional strategies we could consider to help with filling some of those vacancies, whether it's like expanded hiring bonuses for certain departments or whatever, just to kind of, I look at, I think it was specifically TPW, Central Services, PUD, and the sheriff that were kind of like the big, we have these like big gaps that are.
Yes.
I think CDLs, folks with CDLs.
Yeah.
Yes, and I will say that the commission approved an audit work plan, and the internal auditor is currently auditing HR, human resources, in terms of recruitment and retention. So we expect that there'll be a report coming out of the audit committee. It's a pretty involved audit, and we're hopeful that some of those strategies will be identified as best practices. But in the meantime, we are using retention, signing bonuses for certain departments, and there is a policy around that with a certain amount of vacancies that there's different levels. Case in point. Now, police is a little bit different. They had gotten a grant. They had received a grant that allows them to increase their signing bonuses. We have asked the grantor if we can do that, if they would consider allowing the sheriff as another public safety agency as the police department fills up, but yet the sheriff still has relatively low numbers. We received word that that is indeed the case, and we're going to be reviewing and perhaps increasing those bonuses.
Okay. I mean, that was definitely one of the things that was kind of top of mind for me was the sheriff's office. I know that's Commissioner Fisher nodding too. But like, especially if we could get at least the figure for that, just, figuring out what to try to bake into this, that'd be helpful. Whatever the next round of this is.
Well, because it's grant funded, and I need to verify that, and we'll put this in the answers. That should not represent an allocation of revenue for the sheriff, but
There
for the
wouldn't be
other
like a
departments.
match for it or anything. It would just be a fully grant funded thing.
I'd have to go review that one, but I will say what we've typically done is those signing bonuses have been used mostly from salary savings from the departments. Now, it's been smaller of late because we've been budgeting tighter. But we will try and give you a comprehensive answer to that question.
Thank you. And I actually only have one other question. Miraculously.
If you want to shoot, then we'll move on past.
There's a few task forces in our police department that don't kind of get called out by line items, but a lot of times we'll see the summary of them when they are grant funded, like the drug enforcement task force. Could we get information on the gang task force? Because one of the things that kind of stuck out to me when I was meeting with them, Commissioner Davenport was with me when he had this discussion, was it's like a little unclear what the size is of that task force, how that's changed over time. And since it's not funded with grant money, the regulations are, if we're seeing success, and I think the commission has made clear that a huge priority for us is this violence prevention and gang intervention. I'm wondering if there's utility in us kind of understanding how much of the PD's budget is that, and whether we might want to specifically look at either solidifying that so it can't be reduced or increasing it if there was a desire.
We'll do our best to segment that.
Thank you.
And it relates to what he just said about the police department, the real-time crime center. I've heard a presentation just this week on that, and it's amazing what that working on and that, and I think it helps with what Jesse was just saying there as far as addressing.
And me building on that too, with that, were there any specific requests from the gang unit in those requests that weren't funded? Maybe that's in the.
Staff.
We'll see that with.
Cover that.
I don't need the answer right now.
Patrick?
So just in, just two questions. I've seen this before, but it's a clarification. When it comes to, our FY21, FY25 skinny budget, recommend additional positions, the little sheet that you gave out. Some of the positions are 3 months, 6 months, 9. Why is that? So it's a question of why, why not 12 months for?
Well, I would say, typically, if we're gonna budget any new positions, then they won't be approved until June, and the money won't be there until July. And oftentimes, departments don't really start the hiring process, obviously, until it's been approved, and usually a few weeks after that. So most of the time, you're pretty safe in waiting until the second quarter of the fiscal year to fully fund it. And that does save some dollars. On the other hand, you'll have to fully fund it the next year. So there's a small obligation you're creating when you do that. Others, and we can go line by line, Commissioner Davenport, if you want, but some of them are based on, they don't need the position until then, based on some policy or service. Some of them are just trying to save some money, for to try and get it done. There are different reasons for different ones, but if you have any specific ones, we can run that down.
No, I remember seeing it from prior budget, that makes sense. So we go to E32 transit. Go over. So I thought we were using these, SPOS funds that cover fare box, so to be fair free. I'm going from significant deficit. Our total expenses, available unrestricted net position. Can you go over that, line 832?
Yes.
What am I missing?
So in the past, transit was funded really through three major sources. You mentioned one, sir, the fare box. The other was federal funds from Federal Transit Administration. And the third was a general fund contribution or transfer out. And you heard Finance Director Boyd talk about transfers out. And again, I'll say it again, as y'all go into this, he helped me to understand early on here that there's a direct correlation between transfers out growing and fund balance decline. And so one thing we want to focus on, perhaps, as you try and either add things or take things, but want to be mindful of fund balance, is thinking about those transfers out. And certainly using one-time money for one-time expenses is really important. To get back to the question at hand. This is a projection. Right now, the primary funding for transit does come from two sources, not three. We're fare free now. The federal government and the 5307 funds, and then there are other capital funds, 5339 and whatnot, as well as T-SPLOST. In this cycle and congruent with the budget, you will see the new agreement, transit agreement with the university. And in that, we are proposing a 2-year agreement, and we have a split. So now, a few years ago, when the commission went fare free, the university was not an eligible recipient of FTA funds. Back in 2013, when I first got here, both entities report to a database that then provides money back to the community. If we both report together, we get more money than we would have gotten, either one of us. How we split that, how we share it. Well, when we had a fare, we can't give a federal dollar to an ineligible recipient. So the way that we did that was we charged fares, the university agreed to pay so much for their faculty and staff, and then they reported their ridership to the federal government, and there was money given to us, and in order to share it, we gave the university a credit. That went away with fare free. The university really wanted to get that share of the money. Ultimately, they became an eligible recipient. So now this agreement that's coming to you is how we split those funds. Historically, it's been 60-40. The new agreement that you'll see is 59-41, so it hasn't deviated very much. And there are some other affectations to the agreement, but both UGA and ACC Gov staff feel like it's a solid agreement. And I bring all that up, Commissioner Davenport, to say this. In the agreement, you would agree to hold, to not charge fares, because that is how the sharing of revenues is predicated. It doesn't preempt you from doing that. If you want to do something different, that's fine. We would just need to go back to the university and work it all out, where we would have a rate that we would charge their faculty and staff, and there'd be credits and stuff like that. So we can do it either way you want, but at least what's being proposed now is keep it fare free, and this is how we split the federal funds. This is how we move forward.
And I'm looking for, so we had a work session presentation last year. And I thought the numbers added up, and I could be wrong because I left that on my desk, but it just, it looks like it's, yeah, so.
You mentioned T-Splost earlier, Patrick. Did you want to see kind of the way that T-Splost provides support for transit?
Yes.
Good.
Okay. Thank you.
Mike?
See, I have just a couple of questions and some comments. One is on, B12, under fines and forfeitures. We've recently gotten some information from the municipal court judge about traffic citations on the municipal court side. And the downtown development authority, you do, you've done 3 tickets, we'll send you a letter saying, hey, fines have doubled and you owe this much money. And after the 6th ticket, we boot the folks. And then they end up even having to go to court or pay their fines, which are, doing it that way allows for us to have like around a 50 to 55% collection rate on the fines. It seems based on the information we sent, the municipal court fines for somebody parking on the yellow curb or parking in the area with it's not, it seems like it's around the 20% collection rate. So I guess what I'm saying is, see what I'm saying? What can we do to send a letter for folks? Because right now, no one's paying the fines because, I think there was a conversation on Reddit that basically people don't feel like they have to pay the parking fines. And some areas of town, 5 Points especially, there's a lot of yellow curving that people park on the yellow curve. And if you're not enforcing the tickets that are given by making people pay the fines, then no one's going to pay the fines. And they're still going to keep parking on the other curbs.
I'm really glad you brought that up. So on the handout, so one of the 19 positions is for an additional municipal court clerk. You're dead right. We're not foregoing anything, but the caseloads have increased since the pandemic. As of the end of last year, there were over $650,000 of online payments that had not been processed or transmitted to Athens-Clarke County.
Right.
Payment processing is currently running about 9 to 10 months behind, with approximately 1,000 payments coming in per month, 618 being processed per month with the current workloads. An individual employee is able to process, this is from the magistrate court judge, 8 payments per hour. So do the math. And so this is one of those, one of the few positions that's actually going to capture the revenue to help pay for it.
Right. And that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it is. And I'll say this too about the, we need to revisit the red light camera issue, because I think that was, for one, it's a safety issue, but also it was like generating 500,000 a year.
And we had some issues with the vendor. And so we've settled all that and we're ready to move forward, hopefully with the new one. Of course, that's pending state approval of those locations.
And my next question deals with B17 underneath B17. You're shifting, you're recommended to shift positions are being transitioned from full ARPA funding to 75% ARPA funding, 3% Euro fund. Is there a reason why we're doing that? I was thinking, when we funded the ARPA positions that they kind of, once we ran out of ARPA, those positions, that I thought it was understood that. And I'm just wondering, because we still have some administrative dollars based on a spreadsheet, I think 1.4 million.
Yeah, yes.
So you could transition that 78,000 back.
Well, and what we're trying to do is, so those folks are not only doing ARPA work, but sometimes doing a little bit of other stuff, and we're able to utilize them. We can keep them 100% ARPA funded to the end of 26 and then cut it off. But what we're trying to do is transition them slowly to to represent, work that they're doing for ARPA and for non-ARPA things. So we could do it either way you want.
I had a comment on that as well, and that, Jess, I really wanted to know which board positions they were and perhaps descriptions of those as well.
Yes.
And while we're in positions and saving money with positions like the one you were talking about, can we get some possible grant funding, the kind of grant funding that that sustainability grant position would be looking for on that return on investment? Because I know there's a lot of federal funds out there in a lot of different pots that we're not able to get. And also, if there are any ones too, in particular, that, could go also to our residents as well to deal with low income housing, housing improvements that, continue to go into energy efficiency and so forth, and other kinds of, things that are outreach to the community. So just an array, just a little bit more about what we might be missing out on.
And if I might, and this might help answer very quickly, some of what Commissioner Hamby was asking too. So back in February 22, when the commission made the different, we just had no idea what forms that would take. And so we proposed 4 positions, not knowing what the future held. And one of those is a compliance person that's located in HCD, because we have contracts. And so making sure that we're being compliant. Another person is a data person. You asked, we want outcome. We want to know how these funds are being spent. And that is a person that's in the chief data officer's GIS office. And she's been doing an excellent job with these dashboards. A third position was for community engagement, and it housed out of inclusion and assisting HCD. And just to let you know the burden of the contracts, we've been asking the community engagement person to help out with contracts as well. And then the 4th position is the new community impact division administrator of HCD. And I will tell you that she has her hands full with ARPA right now, but this commission is sort of giving us a direction on the types of nonprofit assistance and programs that you want to see. I fully see that position transitioning over because we're not going to eliminate that division HCD at the end of 26. I think it's building on direction that this commission and ones have given us.
Along that line, the one dealing with outcomes and such, I had someone reach out to me and made a really valid point about whether or not we have someone who's evaluating the outcomes, not just the outcomes, but just looking really closely and reflecting on the outcomes being measured. So if you're looking at, for example, getting homeless people, individuals into jobs, and maybe it's not just the initial job, but whether or not they're in the job 6 months or a year later. They were just using that as an example. But I think there's outcomes and measurements. And my response to that person was, you don't have a whole graduate degree, defense team that's making you get the best possible outcomes for your study for a dissertation. But do we have anything that's really in place to make sure that our outcomes that we are measuring are really the accurate ones, and just a reflection, continuous improvement on that. So perhaps that's something that could be incorporated into one of those, person's position, and sort of thinking of that along those lines.
Well, what I would really appreciate is, at any time in the future, just reviewing some of those dashboards that are out there.
Yeah.
Staff would love feedback from y'all about things that you'd like to see, things that are missing or anything like that. I mean, they're doing really good work over there, and I'm not sure how many people are really aware of that, but we would appreciate y'all telling your networks too that these dashboards are there, and we want to hear from residents as well.
Carol, remind me just about the grant writing position for sustainability. I know we have 2 grant writers in HCD. I don't know if those positions are filled or not, or you mentioned return on investment. I guess I'm curious about how that's played out, and it may or may not have worked. And if it didn't, then we need to figure that out. And if they're not filled, maybe they don't need to be filled. I don't know.
They are filled.
But are they doing grants to,
Yes.
the whole point of those, I think, was to do grants so that they either help pay for their positions and find dollars like.
Right, additional community benefit.
Right.
Yep, so they are filled and a portion of their job is out searching for grants. Like Manager Williams said, the vast majority of what HCD is doing right now is contract management. Over 60 contracts right now are being managed, plus an additional 6 coming in. So it's all hands on deck related to contract management. Those 2 grant specialists are searching for grants, but they're also doing a lot of contract.
And then the youth services is doing grant administration. HC, inclusion of an employee in there is helping with HCD, that the ARPA funded position.
Soon economic development will with possibly some workforce.
PW has a lot of grants.
Well,
I know I'm familiar with all the grants that are happening, but I just didn't know about those 2 positions.
I believe that they had written a couple of successful grant applications. We can get you that.
Well, recently the lead grant application. So there is a little bit of return on investment. We hear you.
Additional questions or information you'd like staff to gather for us?
Yeah, quickly, I just want to follow the thing I heard. So, you know, the person that's in the inclusion office, working with HCD, do contracting, help with contracting?
Community engagement. And so we proposed that was one of 4 positions, and we have that housed in inclusion because they have a community engagement function that we're hoping to build upon. But because of the Assistant Manager Jones referred to just the sheer number of contracts, they're doing both that and contract management. You know, we're training them to do that to try and make sure that you know, those awarded funds and services and outcomes are all happening as prescribed.
Well, what may will help me then, okay. HCD, I think right now, they fully staffed, are they fully staffed right now?
Yes.
Like to know how many people then are doing contracting? And I guess I'm asking, and again, I know we have regulations and guidelines we follow. One question I got, okay, have we changed over the last 10, 15, 20 years? Have we changed? Are we doing contracting? I mean, are we, how we compare with municipalities when they do their contracting? And I guess if we're doing those many and tying up that much time, is a process, a better process? And I know we've been talking about that a better process that we can not, when we go through these contracts, and y'all have heard me say that it's not so convoluted that it ties up the staff because of everything that we're doing if we have not upgraded or have come to the 21st century.
Well, 2 different distinctions. One is what we've heard from you quite a bit about is, rightfully so, is the pace at which we can turn those contracts around. I call that more on the procurement side and then getting to insurance and all those things. And then there's contract administration. You know, you got the contract signed, and now there's compliance and outcomes and all those things, payments, things of that nature. When I talk about contracts tonight, that's mostly what I'm talking about. However, I heard you, and with Assistant Manager Jones Edwards working with finance and HR departments on the front end of getting the contract signed, it was bifurcated between finance and human resources. Finance on procurement, and then human resources for the insurance. So I had 2 different departments and trying to figure out how we could have more efficiency. What I have done is I have assigned all of, and I also want to be fair to finance on this. There are many different, I mean, every user department is involved in their own contract. So TPW has to play a role because the other personnel don't know the scope and all of those things. And then at the end, getting it signed, there's a contract transmittal process that goes through the clerk's office, and it has to go clerk, attorney, myself, the mayor. That takes, a little bit of time too. What I've changed this year to hopefully meet your expectation is we have taken the insurance piece of that, and now all of that is over in finance. So I have it in one department. And I will say that we had a gentleman from the UGA contracts office. We came over, we asked for their best practices. It's phenomenal. Had some great ideas. I will say that Finance Director Boyd has picked up the ball and run with it. He's got a matrix of insurance that should make it easier to get to that, and hopefully streamline that. And David, I don't know if you care to add anything to that or not.
No.
Okay.
I know we're talking about budget, Mayor, because, you know, I think grant specialists are so important for what we're trying to do. And I just hate that we have to tie them up with contracts. You know, we really, you know, because you got to train them. Especially if they're grant writers, they may not be familiar with contracts. So I'm trying to figure out how do we tie those individuals up to what we try to get dollars into this community, and I have to tie them up.
Quit creating new contracts. You know, and it's just the pace of the work. And I don't mean to be flippant, but I hear you. And I think there's been a lot of money flooding the nation and the federal government for a variety of things. And some of those we've been able to tackle, you know, and some we've missed those opportunities. Certainly on sustainability, this commission has directed that we meet that 2035 clean energy challenge. Okay. That's 11 years from now. That's tomorrow. That's not 30 years in the future. And there's a lot of money out there now for different things. And we're really turning a corner here to get into high gear to start moving towards that. And then in the same vein, in 2050, you pledge that the community will be 100% clean and renewable energy. Well, we can't start that in 2036. So both those things need to move forward. And I don't think that the sustainability person will be laden with contracts. They will be focused on grant management. And I will say, if this commission wants to have additional grant specialists unfettered by contracts, we can do that too. But for the existing employees, we can take contracts off of them, but somebody's going to have to do it.
So where the housing authority got $3.5 million today.
I think that was an earmark from
More.
yes, Warnock and also.
Were we expecting that, I guess, or?
I heard that the housing authority was seeking that. I didn't hear the formal announcement though. That's great news. And I believe that is applicable to phase 3 of Bethel, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, because phase 2's already been awarded the tax credits, North downtown.
So is somebody keeping a list of what all we've asked for?
All right, so
They're all right there.
that's a good transition. You know, this sort of list is always helpful because it sometimes illustrates modifications that the commission may want to make in the budget as now. Just in terms of and I don't want to stop questions if there's some others, so just don't feel like you've got to stop. But just in terms of laying out the next few meetings, staff will deliver information to the whole body. The next time we gather around the budget, Tuesday, May 14th, coming up, constitutional elected officers will speak, break, and then there will be an opportunity for commissioners to sort of lay on the table, hey, here's where I would like to go with this. And sometimes at that meeting, it's clear that the commission's coalescing around 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things, and that's always very helpful. Then Thursday, 1 week from tonight, there will be an additional budget review. That's going to be in this building. The Tuesday meeting will be at the CCSD admin building. The Thursday meeting, week from tonight, will be in this space. If there's some coalescence then, and it's pretty clear what the commission defined option is going to look like, that may be all we need. If an additional day is needed, following the Wednesday, May 22nd agenda setting meeting, which again will be CTSD, there is an opportunity for a meeting the next night, Thursday, May 23rd here, if we do need an additional budget day. And then the anticipation is that on Wednesday, June 5th, again, at the CCSD building where we'll be meeting, that would be the final vote on the budget. So those dates are in front of you. Andrew Williams.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. Just for everybody's sanity, I'm calling it contract management, but in reality, it's grants management. So these are grants that have been given out. And so there's a contract associated with it, but it's not exactly the same as contracting itself. Just a small distinction.
So last year when you
published your proposed budget, and then we found out that property tax revenue was higher than what was in your budget. When will we get that number?
So we've just gotten that, and that's about $1.7 million.
Yes.
So it's more than what's.
Yes.
Well, and the finance staff helped me understand that. So in here, it talks about using 6.7 million of fund balance, right? That is not congruent with the spreadsheet that David handed out. And in there, you'll see the use of fund balance is 5 million. So the difference between that spreadsheet, the use of 5 million in fund balance, and 6.7 in your narrative is 1.7 of new revenue. That's how they reflect.
So the book is old, the spreadsheet's new.
And also the 2-year reserve percentage went up on that spreadsheet versus what's in the 2-month reserve.
Yeah, and obviously, as you increase the general fund budget in total, that 2 months is gonna move as well.
Or decrease.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, well, though, they spent a lot of time on that's the way about
So the noon meeting is the general work session,
that's next week.
which is next week, Tuesday. And then that same day, Tuesday the 14th, 5:30 is the budget.
Where's that, is the work session?
And the general work session's in this room.
Okay.
A work session will be here.
Work beat, there, I think is it. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Both 14th meetings at CCS. Thank you.
Did I read an email that someone was gonna make the audio better for us so that we could actually understand each other?
Well, so I did have a conversation. And while the audio was not clear, it's the same phenomena that we have in the chambers. And that is, these are omnidirectional mics and you need to be close to them.
Yeah, but if
So
you were too
people were
close,
back
then it, I mean, even when it was too close, then it was like, blah, 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 blah. Like,
Well, there's a
so there's
distance.
yeah.
And what we talked about, go ahead, Jeff.
I was gonna say, obviously that was our first time in the space in
Yeah.
dealing with it. It's an issue that they have for the Board of Education too, just in the way that space, City Hall has its
Yes.
own ramifications, and there's some things we're working on to try to improve that for next week, because it's short of it. But there are some things, as Manager Williams mentioned, to help. A couple times it is new for you all to turn on the mics, which was a different setup. There were a few that didn't get turned on when people were talking. So it's kind of a combination of things, but we've talked through some stuff. And in fact, a suggestion we had for them was something that their tech person who was working with us is looking at tonight that may help it a little bit as well. So
I was
working on some ways to get it. The audience perspective is actually great, but there's 3 different kinds of feeds that we were working with and kind of learning on the fly. So
I was fine with it. I didn't really want to hear what y'all had.
Yeah, it really eases things up a lot.
Let me make this suggestion too, since I help put that thing together. It's good though, if you're not talking, that your mic is off. You won't get feedback.
Kind of like Zoom.
If you're not talking, turn your mic off. That's helpful.
Especially when you're clapping.
Mayor, I'm gonna actually miss, and just so y'all know, I'm gonna have to miss next Tuesday's meeting. I've got to take my dad down to Hendry County for some stuff, 80-year-old stuff.
I'll miss next Thursday. I got colonoscopy.
Okay.
Meeting.
Anybody else?
Enjoy that drink.
It's out the window.
If you do have some ideas where you sort of have clarity, hey, I'd like to see X, Y, and Z, you can email the group. That way we can bring it.
That about wraps it up.
Share to y'all's question.
I think I'd rather.
I understand. I'm talking to. This figure, handout that we got today. So the bottom right of the top half of this handout, 12,069,000. That's the unallocated fund balance in total above what the minimum required. And that includes everything we've spent to date, including the CDO from Tuesday for the community partnership program. And it includes the new revenue from the tax assessor. Okay. So that's like the most up-to-date figure they have. And so if you multiply that by the roughly 86% figure that they were talking about using, you end up with about 10 million.
Which, yeah, could you turn that around? So
The one that we just got today from Dave.
Go on
Got it.
like spread.
Starts off with these bar graphs.
I'm just.
Any other questions or things that you would like staff to deliver for the group? Entertain a motion to adjourn. I've got a motion from Commissioner Wright, a second from Commissioner Davenport. All in favor of adjourning, please say aye. Any opposed? All right, y'all have a great evening. There's plenty of food left. If you bite to eat.
Don't know, but